We continue now at the top of Daf Yomi Gemara in Meseches Gitin. This is Gittin Daf 80a. The Mishnah is continuing to discuss a case where a get was given and the get is not kosher, and so then we say Teitze Mizeh Mizeh. We say that she has to divorce the first husband again. That get wasn't good. If she remarried based on the get that wasn't good, she has to divorce the second husband. She can't stay married to the second husband. And then there are a number of other halachas that were strict with her, and the Mishnah continues to discuss these strict halachas. Bas Levi min haMeiser. Let's say she's the daughter of a Levi. So normally, if the daughter of a Levi is divorced, so now she's able to have Meiser again because she's the daughter of a Levi. But here she's going to be disqualified from having Meiser. Rashi says Bas Levi min haMeiser kenasahu. That's a fine against her again because you have a situation where she took a get and she used a get that wasn't kosher to remarry. And the Mishnah continues, Bas Kohen min Truma. Similarly, if she's the daughter of the Kohen, she's now disqualified from Truma. Rashi says, min Truma kedamrin and besota. That's what we say in Sota, mi v'nitma gimel pa'amim. It's learned out from the pasuk. Says v'nitma 3 times, echad lebal v'echad leboel v'echad letruma. One of those times it teaches us that there's a disqualification from Truma in this situation of adultery. Over here, it's essentially adultery because she's really still married to the first husband. Ve'ein yorshin shel zeh v'yorshin shel zeh yorshim ksubasa. Also, the inheritors of this one, meaning the first husband and the second husband, the inheritors of both husbands do not inherit her ksuba. Rashi explains, Ve'in yorshin shel zeh bonim shahayu lo mimenu. What that means is she has sons from him, Yarshin Ksubasa, they don't get her Ksuba. B'Yavamas Parchinan, the Gemara in Yavamas asks on this, Ksuba Ma'avidita, what are we talking about Ksuba? Hakatani Ein La Ksuba, she doesn't receive her Ksuba in this case, because again, it was a divorce that wasn't a kosher divorce. So what do we mean? The sons don't inherit her Ksuba, she doesn't get the Ksuba. Umeshani, and the Gemara over there answers, Ksubas Binin Dichran, what we're referring to is the Ksuba of the male children, that's a Takonas Chachamim, it's not the regular Ksuba. Shetiknu Chachamim, Sheyorshu Bonea Yeser Al Chulkeyon Dimachu. And the Chachamim said that generally speaking, let's say a wife brings into the marriage some property, and then the sons of her husband, some of those sons are her sons, and some of those sons might be from other wives. So the halach is that her sons get that property that she brought into the marriage. They get a little bit more. They get that property because it's not going to be exactly an even division. When a wife gets married, it's so written into the ksuba is, I brought in this particular property into the marriage, and therefore my sons will get this property. That property that I brought into the marriage isn't going to be divided evenly among all of your children. So that's normally the halacha. That's not true over here. Keshemesa b'chai ba'al, again, this is talking about when she dies during the lifetime of her husband, and her husband inherits her, and then it goes to the children. Even though her husband inherits her, so here they don't take that ksubas bin indichron. Her male sons don't get that portion that she brought into the marriage. That again is a fine against her in this case. And the Mishnah continues, via Mesu, and if they die, that's talking about the first husband and the second husband, if they die, Achav shel zeh v'yachav shel zeh cholzin v'lo miyavmin, the brother of this first husband and the brother of the second husband, they should do chalitza, and they should not do yibam. And Rashi explains, Achiv shel sheni cholitz midrabanan. So the brother of the second husband, that's not a real husband, it's not a real marriage, because she never divorced from the first husband. So really there's no obligation of yibam or chalitza at all, but they say that you have to do chalitza on a drabanan level. We have to treat it as if they were married. We have to be strict. Kedepei Rashnu, as we explained earlier on the previous Amud, gabe get, that was by the halacha by get also, we require a get from the second husband, Shema yomru giresh zeh v'nasa zeh, because people don't realize, they think maybe she was divorced from the first husband. They'll think that there was a marriage to the second husband, so we're strict, we require a get, we require chalitza midrabanan. V'yachav shel rishon, now in terms of the brother of the first husband, sarach lachlotz min haTorah, there's a doraisa obligation of yivam and chalitza, and we require chalitza in this case. Why? V'lo miyavin, we don't allow yivam mishum kanasa, because it's a fine. Again, in this situation, she received a divorce. Now the divorce wasn't good, so really there should be an obligation. She could do yivam or chalitza, but we say no, since she took this get that wasn't good, and so it looks like she was taking a get that was a divorce, it really wasn't a divorce, so we give her a fine, and we say that she's not allowed to do yibam, she's only allowed to do chalitza. They do chalitza in this case. And the Mishnah continues, Shina Shemo Ushema. These are other disqualifications that can happen to a get. Let's say they change his name or her name in the get, Shem Iro v'Shem Ira, or the name of his city, the name of her city. Again, it's the same thing. We're strict. She has to divorce both husbands, and we apply all of the stringencies we said above. And the Mishnah continues, Kal arayos she'amru tzarosein mutaros, all the cases of arayos where they say that the co-wives are mutter, meaning to say there's no requirement of yibam or chalitza. If these co-wives go ahead, v'nisu, and they get married, v'nimsu elu islandus, then it turns out that they're really islandus, meaning to say, really the tsaros weren't allowed to go and get married. They got married when they weren't weren't allowed to. So again, we apply the same stringencies. Teitze mizeh mizeh. They have to divorce this one and this one. V'chol hadrachim ha'eluban. We apply all the stringencies above. And Rashi explains, Kol arayos she'amru tzarosein mutaros, chomesh esrei arayos she'amru chacham. There are 15 cases of arayos where the chachamim say, she'tzarosein mutaros linasei l'shuk below chalitza. The co-wives are allowed to marry to the marketplace, meaning they can marry anyone. They don't have to do chalitza, kishemesu ba'alein below banim, when their husbands die without children. The case over here is normally, if a husband dies without children, so then the wives, there's an obligation of yibam or chalitza. But sometimes you have a situation where the wife, she can't possibly do yibam because it would end up being a situation of arayas. She would end up marrying some kind of person that she's not allowed to marry, some kind of relative she's not allowed to marry, a case of arayas. So in those cases, we say that the obligation for yibam completely falls away, and the co-wives also, they're mutter to marry. There's no obligation for chalitza whatsoever. So now the Mishnah is saying, Holchu atzaros shel arayas. Let's say this co-wife of the arayas goes ahead, v'nisel l'shuk, and she gets married. She doesn't do chalitza because she assumes it's mutter. V'nimtzu arayos islandus. Then it turns out that other wife who was the arayas, who ended up making that there was no obligation of yivam, she ends up turning out to be an islandess. So it no longer creates the patur from yivam. An islandess is a woman who's underdeveloped. She's never going to have the signs of maturity, and so therefore, when it comes to an islandess, v'gloi milsa shayu kidushe hameis betos, it turns out that the original marriage was actually a mistake. You marry an islandess, that wasn't really a kedushin. That whole original marriage to the islandess was nothing, and so therefore you weren't the co-wife. That co-wife wasn't the co-wife of an erva. V'nimtzu shelo hayu elu tzarosei, and it comes out they weren't co-wives of erva. V'lo pitrum ha'arayos ha'elu ben chalitza, they were never patur from chalitza, and so they went ahead when they really should have done chalitza, but they went ahead and instead they married someone they weren't supposed to marry. So that's what we're saying. Teitze mizeh mibal shenisis lo. Now she has to divorce the husband that she married. Umizeh means min hayavam. She also can't be with the brother-in-law. She's not allowed to be with either one. We apply all of the stringencies. And the Mishnah continues, Hakones as yevemto v'holchat sarasa v'nisas la'acher. Let's say a person does do yibam. Person marries the yavam, and then v'holchat sarasa v'nisas la'acher. Then the co-wife goes ahead and she marries someone else, because generally speaking, if one of the wives does yibam, so then the other wives are free to marry whoever they want. V'nimtza zu shahaisa islandess. And then again, it turns out you have a situation of islandess over here. So really the co-wife wasn't allowed to just go and marry. So teitze mizeh mizeh v'chol hadrachim ha'eluba. So it's the same halacha again. She has to divorce from both. It's not considered a proper marriage, and we apply all of the stringencies. And the Mishnah continues, Kasav sofer get liish. Let's say the scribe writes the get for the man. V'shover liish, and he writes the shover for the wife. The shover is the receipt that shows that she was given the proper ksuba, and that he does properly. Now the man is supposed to give the get to the woman, the husband gives the get to the wife, and then the wife, when she receives the ksuba, she gives the shover to the husband. V'tah, but then he makes a mistake. He writes it that way, however he makes a mistake. V'nasam get liish v'shover liish. He ends up giving the get accidentally to the wife and the shover to the husband. V'nasnu zelazeh, and then they give to each other the wrong documents, exactly the opposite. Ulachar zman, now after a certain time period, get yotze miyad ha'ish. You have the get, the husband is holding the get, it should be the wife holding the get. The shover miyad ha'ish, and the wife is holding the shover, she's the one that should be holding the get. So apparently they weren't divorced, so we apply the stringencies. Teitze mizeh mizeh, she has to divorce this one and this one. V'chol hadrachim ha'eluba, we apply all the stringencies that we said above. Rabbi Lazar says, Im la'alter yotza ein zaget. Im la'achar zman yotza harei zaget. If that happens immediately, we discover this mistake, so then that's true, it's not a get. But let's say there's a time delay, and then we find that the documents are switched, then we still assume that it is a get. Why? Because lo kol heimenu min arishon la'abed zechuso shel sheni. That first husband is not able to later make this kind of a claim in order to make the second husband lose out. In other words, it could be that they conspired. Maybe they just switched documents. We can't just assume that second marriage is no good just because they produce the documents in reverse. And Rashi continues, V'chol hadrachim ha'eluba. So first the Mishnah again said that in the situation where we had a case of tzaras erva, and that Tzara went ahead and got married, and she shouldn't have got married, so we apply all the stringencies. Uv'yavamas mukmin alak Rabbi Akiva. In Yavamas they say this Mishnah follows the opinion of Rabbi Akiva, to Amar yesh mamzer mechayve lavin, because we're applying and we're saying there's a mamzer over here in this case, even though you're really only talking about chayve lavin in this situation. Rabbi Akiva holds that when you have a kind of relationship that's just a lav, still it produces a mamzer. That's who this Mishnah is following. Then the Mishnah had a case again where the co-wife goes and marries because the general halach is if one of the wives does yibum, so the co-wives can marry anyone. Then it turns out the wife that did the yibum islandess, she's an islandess. That's not yibum. She was never the wife of the mace. It turns out the co-wife wasn't allowed to do whatever she wanted. She ended up marrying without doing chalitza, which again is a violation. So again, they have to divorce both. Again, she has to separate from her current husband. She can't marry the yavam. And then the Mishnah said, "Kasav sofer echad get leish lagarish boishto v'shover leishto shetimser lebal kashiyah for laksuba." The scribe wrote the get intending that he would give it to the man to use for divorce, and the receipt intending to give it to the wife that she would give it to the husband when she gets her ksuba. V'tah sofer, but then the sofer made a mistake. Keshemasar len ashtaras, when he gave them the documents, v'nasan get leisha v'shover leish, he gave the get to the wife and the shover to the husband. V'hei masur zelazen, they gave it to each other in the wrong direction. V'al chazu v'nisas, and then she goes ahead and she remarries. Kesvura shezaget shemasur labala, she thinks she got a get. V'zeh savar shemasur loishto shover, and he thinks that his wife gave him a shover. Yotze mitachas yidei isha motzi lefanenu laharos shover v'areo get. Now he's taking it out to show his shover. Turns out he has the get. So then we said at the end of the Mishnah, according to the opinion of Rebbe Lazar, so if it happens immediately, so then already we say that's true. But Gemara Mefarish, now the Gemara will explain what that means, that if it happens immediately, so then we say it's not a get. The Gemara will explain. Lo kol heimenu, but if it happens after a delay, so then they're not believed to do that. Ein hakol kedvarav la'aminu, we don't just believe when he takes out the wrong document that everything was done wrong a long time ago. La'abed zechuso shel sheni, that now the second one loses out. Shenasa, meaning that second one that now married her based on the get, you can't later come out and say the documents were switched. We say maybe it was a conspiracy between them. Maybe they exchanged the shtaros, they swapped the shtaros after the remarriage. And the Gemara says, "My malchus she'ena hogenes." The Mishnah began on the previous Amud that let's say they write in the wrong government in terms of dating the get, but the way the Mishnah phrased it was a kingdom that is not proper. What is a kingdom that is not proper? Malchus haromim. That refers to the kingdom of Rome. Why is that called a kingdom that's not proper? Mishum de'ein lohem lo ksav v'lo lashon. The reason is because they don't have a way of writing and they don't have a language. They've taken it from other nations, and therefore they're called a malchus she'ena hogenes. And the Gemara continues, Amar Ula says, Malchus Begitin. Why did they say they have to date according to the government in a Gerisha? And the reason is Misham Shalom Malchus, it's in order to keep peace with the government. And the Gemara says, Misham Shalom Malchus Teitze V'Avlad Mamzer. But if they had an institution, they had a takana that was made just because of keeping the peace, and now you don't follow that, so then we're so strict, we say divorce and the child's a Mamzer. And the Gemara says, yes, we do say that. Rabbi Meir Lataime, because it's Rabbi Meir following his opinion. The Amar Rabbi Hamnuna Mishmei de Ula, because Rabbi Hamnuna said in the name of Ula, Omer Hayer Rabbi Meir would say, Kol HaMishana Mimatbeya, Shetavu Chachamim Begitin Havlad Mamzer. Anyone who changes from the formulation the Chachamim make by Gitin, so the child is a Mamzer. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. The Mishnah said, L'shum Malchus Yavan. Let's say it's written for the kingdom of Yavan. And the Gemara says, we need to list all these cases in the Mishnah. Diyash Me'inan Malchus Sheina Hoganis, because if you only talked about a government that's not proper, Mishum Demalicha, that's because they're ruling right now. Aval Malchus Madai Malchus Yavan, but if you're talking about the kings of Madai and Yavan, what happened in the past is happened in the past. It shouldn't be an issue. And the Gemara continues, Viyash Me'inan Malchus Madai Malchus Yavan. If we only learned the case of the Malchus Madai and Malchus Yavan, Mishum Demalchusahav, at least those are governments. Aval Binyan Abayis, but when it comes to dating according to the building of the Beis Hamikdash, so what happened. V'yashmin and binyan abayis, and if we only taught binyan abayis the amri kamidchri shevchayu, then people will say, they're bragging about their good times of old. That's something they shouldn't be writing in the get. Aval churban abayis, but to write in from the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, that saruhu, that represents pain, a malos. I would say again, maybe that's not a problem. So tzricha, so that's why we need all of the cases in the Mishnah. And Rashi explains, She'ein lohem lo ksav lo lashon. Again, the Romans don't have writing and language. Ela mishal acheres. It all comes, they took it from other nations. And Rashi continues, Mishum shalom malchus. It's for peace with the government. She'yehei lanu shalom imam, meaning that we should be at peace with them. She'yomru chashuv imanu beineim shekosem shtaroseim b'shmeinu. Because when the government sees that we date our shtaros according to their years, they say also we see that the Jews consider us important. That's a way of making peace with them. Yotzi v'avlad mamzer bitmia. But then the Gemara said, just because of shalom malchus, if you don't do that the right way, so then we say the child's a mamzer, and the Gemara said to that, Rabbi Meir Lataime, Rabbi Meir follows his reasoning. Stam Mishnah is Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir. Later we'll also say this is the opinion of Rabbi Meir. Mishum de Malicha, and so then the Gemara said, why do we need all these various cases? So the Romans, they're in government right now. They're right now the government. If we're going to write the Romans in when we're in a different area, so then the king of our area is going to be upset that we're using the Roman government, which exists right now. But if we use some other government that doesn't exist, that was in the past, they won't care. That government's already gone. They're not going to be jealous. In other words, you're counting according to the times that Madai began or Yavan began. And again, maybe you would say they won't be offended by that because it's a past government. So no, that's also a problem. And then the Gemara went on to say maybe Binyan Beis HaMikdash, that's not a government at all. Then the Gemara said Binyan Beis HaMikdash, we're bragging about ourselves. Maybe that would be a problem. Maybe the destruction shouldn't be a problem. And that's why the Mishnah lists all the cases to say that all of these cases are in fact a problem. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. The Mishnah said, Haya b'mizrach v'kasa b'mayrav, if he's in the east and they write into the document the west. And so again, it said we have to be strict. It's not a good get. And the Gemara says, man, who's the one that's in the east and they're writing the west? Ilay Mabal, if we're talking about the husband, so Hainu Shina Shmo Shema Shemiru v'Shemiru, we already said that case. That's a case of changing his name or her name, his city or her city. We've already mentioned that idea. Elalav, rather, is it not sofer? We're talking about the scribe. And that follows, Kedamar Lu Rav L'Safrei, V'chein Amar Lu Rav Huna L'Safrei. It's like what Rav said to his scribe, and like what Rav Huna said to his scribe. They said as follows, Ki Azvisu B'Shile, if you're in Shile, Ksovu B'Shile, you should write in the document Shile. You should always write the area where the document's actually written. V'afagav de Mimsrin L'Chumile B'Hine, even though the item might have been given over to you in Hine, but you have to write the location where the document was actually written, not where the transaction took place. V'chi Azvisu B'Hine, similarly, if you're in Hine, Ksovu B'Hine, write down Hine. V'afagav de Mimsrin L'Chumile B'Shile, even though the instructions were given over in Shile. Amar Rav Yehuda Mar Shmuel, Rav Yehuda says that Shmuel says, and we'll take a look at Rashi over here. Rashi says, Ki asvisu behine lichtov shtar, if you're in Hine to write a get, kosvu v'socho shebehine nichtav, you should write that it was written in Hine. V'yafagav d'mimsron v'chulu, even though it was given over in a different city. We will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Pei Amud Beis.